So there's a subject matter this evening, and that is returning to fundamentals. And with every subject matter, we have to see what all these words mean. So, what is fundamental? And if we know it, how do we return to it? And we'll integrate the answer to your question as we go through it. So, how do people view fundamentals today? Now, very often people say, I don't like to attend your talks because you talk too much science. Well, I'm not sure if I do, but on this occasion, I might. Because today, people are trying to work out what fundamentals are. And there are only two insights or approaches that you can use. One is called philosophy, and a lot of things come under this heading. And even that is just principles. And the other one is physics. Now, how do physics approach fundamentals? They're stuck. They're stuck because every time they look to try and find what is fundamental, they really don't find any satisfactory borderline on this. So we understand chemistry, we understand that molecules make up that, we understand that atoms make up that. But then thereafter, we're stuck because the most fundamental physics that we know of is quantum mechanics. And in the quantum world, things are not things. Even though we like to think of particles, points of reality, actually it's not like that. So the questions boil down to a kind of paradigm that says everything must be reduced to a fundamental point system, even though we know points don't exist. So there's a kind of paradox going on all the time. So in an effort to find out what fundamentals are, this physics has failed. It need not be like that. We'll discuss why it need not be like that. Then on the other side of things, there's an approach that says that there is something called consciousness. And consciousness is a fundamental. On the physics side of things, because of the reductionist point of view or materialism, they want consciousness, which they understand to be a problem. The problem of consciousness is called, is an epiphenomena, a product, a manifestation of mind. By mind, they mean brain, neurological networks. One or two advanced people will not fully accept exactly that and say, in order to access this consciousness, we have to go really to the quantum world, because that's one fundamental thing that we have. And yet, you see, the reality comes from an experience. There's one man's experience. His name is Frederica Fagan, an Italian scientist, an Italian-American scientist, and trained in this reductionist physics point of view. And so he recalls in the 1990s, he was at his exotic location, Lake Tahoe. This person is not an ordinary scientist, because this person was responsible for the discovery, the invention, if you will, technical invention of the fundamental operating systems of computers. So he's built up huge companies for this reason, and well respected as a pioneer in computer technology, a pioneer in artificial intelligence, a physicist by training, and so on. So a well-respected scientist. but an unhappy one. He recalls in Lake Tahoe, he had this experience all of a sudden because he was unhappy. He had everything. He made a lot of money from his technological businesses. And yet he found himself deeply, deeply unhappy, even though he had ticked all the boxes of all the things that should make you happy. Big properties, property by this wonderful Lake Tahoe. I've actually been in that location. It's a stunning thing, a beautiful 2.5-kilometer lake surrounded by mountains and snow and so on. I had the fortune to go there and attend a conference and present a paper. And coming from Zimbabwe, I'd never done any snow skiing. So I went up, and the person accompanying me, we thought we'll learn how to do this. So anyway, we were coached by what must have been Hitler's mother, and we didn't know. She didn't tell us about how to stop these skis and do this plowing. So the only way we thought we could stop was to throw ourselves heroically on the snow. But anyway, once we learned this art, it was fine. So it's a stunningly beautiful place, actually. Half of it is in California, half of it is in Nevada. So all of a sudden, he experiences this idea of this overwhelming holistic feeling. He experiences this great feeling of great joy where the consciousness comes not only as the observer, but the thing that is observed also. And it opened up a whole insight for him. And thereafter, he was interested to try to put a scientific explanation on this, to try and make science or physics catch up with this. And in his investigation, he came to the same conclusion that we find in our fundamental philosophy, namely in Vedanta, that there is a discovery of three basic things. First of all, and he puts this as a proposition. Now, if you want to say anything in science, there has to be a proposition, and the proposition has to be convincing. It has to be self-evident. So when we talk of consciousness, what's the first thing we understand? Is it self-evident that you're conscious? Unless you're going to sleep during my talk, yes, you are conscious. And then, is it a fact, because people debate the question of free will, is it a fact that we have free will? It's our experience. So for that reason, it is self-evident. These two things are self-evident. So on the basis of that, he's postulating three things. First thing he's postulating is that life is dynamic. Everything is dynamic. Everything moves. And because everything moves, there is nothing that is permanent. Now I'm elaborating his one word, which is dynamic. Then the second thing that he postulates would be holistic. There is only one thing. And this is evident from the quantum mechanics. Way, way back, it was understood, let's say in the 1960s already, that there was something called, actually even before that, something called entanglement. That is, two subatomic particles having connected with each other, no matter how far apart they are, you change one instantly, the other one changes. And Einstein, for all his genius, could never accept it because he was a thorough determinist. Determinist means that in its extreme form, you cannot have free will. Everything has a cause. And involuntarily, we're hooked up in it. And the extreme version of that will be predetermination. Everything is predetermined and laid out. So free will is a kind of illusion, according to people who follow that view. But at the very fundamental level, namely at the quantum level, is thoroughly indeterministic. It is all to do with possibilities. It is all to do with uncertainty. It is all to do with complete, complete indeterminism, so that when you try to determine it, then it becomes something for you. So there is this dichotomy. About the classical world of physics that Einstein believed in and the quantum world. And for over 100 years, nobody has explained or come to the conclusion of how this whole thing works. And yet, all the technology I'm using now, and most of the technology we're using, is based on quantum science. And then quantum computers are coming up and so on. It was the great, great scientist John Wheeler who said that it into bits. In other words, if we want to find out something fundamental, then it comes in artificial segments called bits. It comes in the quantum world, in other words. And yet, if the quantum world is so mysterious, if the quantum world is holistic, if the quantum world has an effect across the board that you do something to one thing like spin, and immediately the other thing gets changed. Now, this was experimented and proven to be valid, but there was great resistance to it. So that only a few years ago, the Nobel Prize went to the person who originally had proven it to be true. But Einstein maintained, no, it's like a pair of gloves. It was always arranged as a pair, but it was proven wrong by a Northern Ireland person, Northern Irish person called Bell, John Bell. The world is not what we feel or think it is. I always tell the story about that, going back to the Middle Ages. I think let's call it the period of time when in England there was King John. King John was quite greedy. King John visited this wonderful abbey, and he saw there golden goblets and a huge extent of land and tremendous richness, and he became envious. So he said to the poor abbot, I want all this. And he saw the face of the abbot, the mouth dropped down by his knees. And he said, all right, I'll give you a chance. I'll give you 3 questions. If you can, I'll give you 2 weeks. If you can, either personally or send a delegate, come to me in London and answer these questions. Then we'll forget all about it. You continue with your lands. First question is, how long does it take to go around the world? Possible question, it seems. Next question is, I am the king. What am I worth? It's a dangerous question. Third question is, at the time we meet, you have to tell me, what am I thinking now? And so the abbot was in great distress. And he asked many people who he thought was wiser than him, you have the answer to these questions. And the story goes, and it's a kind of poem actually, written by a person called Anonymous. So a shepherd comes to him and says, look, what will you give me if I can answer these questions for you? I won't tell you how I do it at the moment, but And the abbot says, oh, you can have that portion of land and so on and so forth. All right, agreed. There's only one thing, please lend me your monastic clothing. All right. Then he goes off to London. And he's dressed like the abbot, and of course, with the hood on him, nobody knows any difference. So the king says, well, what's the answer to the first question? He says, well, how long does it take to go around the world? If you start with the sun and travel with the sun, 24 hours. Well, I can't argue with that. All right. Next question. What am I worth? Be careful now. You're worth 29 pieces of silver. What? Is that all? Well, Jesus was sold for 30. We just put you one less. Is that okay? All right, can't argue with that. Next question. What am I thinking now? I said, you're thinking I'm the abbot. With that, he took his hood off. Things are not always what they seem. And we are living in a classical world with tables and chairs and people and teenagers and problems. But the fact of the matter is, underneath it all is a quantum world full of quantum fields. That's the fundamental thing. It's not cells. It's not molecules. It's not electrons. It's not space as we know it. It's Hilbert space. And yet, Hilbert space is a kind of space invented. It comes out of ingenuity. So where does all the calculation come from? Where does mathematics come from? It comes from consciousness. And consciousness are these fields that are going on. Now, do we have an equivalent in the Vedanta system? Yes, because it's borrowed from other systems, which clearly indicates, and we find it in the Upanishads, an order that goes from the fundamental to the manifested. So you cannot have complexity coming from simplicity. You cannot have the unconscious. You cannot have the conscious coming from the unconscious. That's the dilemma that modern science has. If you try and reduce everything down to quantities, then you have no explanation. And if you dismiss qualia, that is your own subjective experience, thought, for example, then you have no explanation. Just on the basis that you want to stick to a paradigm that has to insist that the fundamental has to be matter. So there's something else there. There's something in mental activity. There's something about feeling. There's something about your own personal experience, which cannot be quantified at all. It has its own separate special area. And it is the fundamental area. It is consciousness itself being expressed. And what we call all the subatomic particles, an electron, is not a thing, because we see it appears and disappears. Remember the first postulation that life is dynamic. And we take an electron, and you may say, yes, but we've seen an electron. No, what we've done is we have interpreted some bubbling thing coming up, some piece of information coming up from the quantum field. And having observed it, we then determine and bring it into a kind of classical context and interpret it in this way. It's not fundamental at all. It's simply some random thing, some indeterminate thing that is coming up, that is expressing itself from the vastness of a field. All these fields are fields of consciousness. And so long back, people understood this. Ancient scientists completely understood it. And these subtle fields they call tanmatras. And these tanmatras are fields of consciousness. They are consciousness itself. If you like to think of it as subtle movements underneath. One of the best ways to think about it is an ocean. In the deep ocean, everything is homogeneous. It's all one thing. And then it comes up in increasing levels of disturbance until finally it goes over a border, as it were. So every cell in the body, let's say 50 trillion cells you have in the human body, are these classical cells? No. They are a nice cooperation. They are an intermingling of the quantum world and the classical world. And there's no borderline, there's no dividing line. It is just an apparition. So how do we come to this conclusion? Only through an interpretation, because we are constitutionally deficient in our view. We only have, as I keep saying, 5 photographs of what is there in front of us. We don't have anything more than that. We are restricted in our interpretation, in our view and our interpretation. And that means streamlining. And so this man understood this from his own experience. So to understand the fundamentals, it is not good enough alone to understand the principles of it, the theory of it. He would never have investigated this question of consciousness if he had not had this profound experience. And the profound experience is yours. You can't prove it, you can't disprove it. From your point of view, it's true. And then you try to work out why should it be, and what you discover is the way most of scientists are thinking about it, physicists are thinking about it, the whole thing has to be turned on its head. So that the great pioneering genius, Nikola Tesla, who said that if we understand consciousness, then we will have revolutionized the whole world, something of that order. It is, if you have this theory, let's call it a theory for the time being, that consciousness is fundamental, then you have solved all your problems, because it explains quantum mechanics, the quantum world, and it explains free will, which is the deterministic thing that brings it into the classical world. And you have explained how you can reconcile these two things, which is the biggest problem at the moment. More than that, what is the repercussion for any person? The repercussion is that if you understand this consciousness, not only will you have, and when I say understand, I mean experience, then you have solved all the difficulties at the fundamental level, be they domestic, be they financial, be they in terms of relations, be it political, because if you hold on to any other paradigm, if you hold on to a non-holistic world, then you will have power. You'll have a will to exert your power. You'll have a will to exert your control. And all the wars and difficulties in the world are to do with these two things. And even in the science world, holding on to these ideas of reductionism is only to assert power, to say, I have the equation. But there is no equation for consciousness. There's no equation for free will. It doesn't fall into the realm of equation. Why? Because consciousness is the cause of mathematics. Mathematics comes from it. You can't do it the other way around. You can't say, from mathematics, let us get consciousness. It doesn't work like that. Now, it's well known, and I presented it before, there is a kind of mold, a kind of slime mold it's called. And it can be used to map out town planning. It has the capacity to join forces with other slime molds. And if you take a sample of it, put it in the laboratory, and put it into a maze, and put some food in the corner, it can figure out exactly where to go and catch the food. Please don't tell me that this entity is not intelligent. Its intelligence is being used by town planners to find what is the quickest route to somewhere, and to put it into computer technology that says, okay, this will give us the shortest route to everything, because it knows where to go, and when it goes in a different path, then it leaves a kind of trail and says, well, I won't go there again, and finds out instinctively the shortest route. It has no brain. If it has no brain, it is an emanation of consciousness that does not require the neurology of a brain. How can you therefore say that consciousness is produced from a brain? It's the other way around. It is consciousness that produces the brain. It is not the brain that produces consciousness. So when we talk about fundamentals, the most fundamental entity is described in the Upanishads. It's described as, because it transcends all ideas, all concepts, the nearest thing you can say is it is existence itself, Sat. It is consciousness itself, and it is bliss itself. Taittiriya Upanishad puts it a little differently. Anyway, let's deal with the first thing. Something that appears and disappears, you cannot say it is existent. You can only say it's existent for a moment. It's like you ask me, I'm not sure, will you stand outside my car and can you tell me if my left indicator is working? And I have a look at it and I say, yes, no, yes, no. So anything that flashes, what is an electron? In a flash, not in a registered pattern, in a random pattern, because it's a bubbling field of possibilities that come up. And where we see it as a regular thing, in line, and Federica will put it in this way because of his computer experience. And he will say, well, the whole pattern that we are used to in terms of regulating bits of information is because we are streamlining something in one direction. And the options are either 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. Naturally, we're streamlining in a certain direction with an expectation that it'll be like that. That's what we find. That's what we find in the classical world. Now, how do we get from the quantum world to the classical world? It's because of our free will in directing it in a certain way. So you find 16 items in the classical way of enumerating categories. What are those 16 items? And we say this is the whole world. But it's the smallest world. It is only the tip of a tip of a tip of an iceberg. It's only the tip of the tip, the crest of the crest of the crest of a wave that we are seeing. And the rest is profoundly subtle, profoundly causal, and profoundly vast, new dimensions ready for discovery. It's a bit like, you see, supposing you send a drone off to a particular area, and you're seeing the picture that the drone is seeing. The drone is going over, covering over a territory, an area, and you get so involved in it that the picture that is being relayed, it's as if you were flying yourself. And you see, here's a tree, here's a bump, here's a mountain. Fantastic, so engrossed in it. Then all of a sudden, the drone crashes. And that picture is gone for you. But what happens? First of all, you get a little stunned. Oh, my world is gone. But then you look around and say, oh, what another world. And every limited thing that goes yields a discovery, oh, another world. And that, oh, another world, unlimited possibilities, unlimited dimensions. Something like a sphere with a number of different points on it, as it were. And when you tackle it at right angles, you get a certain experience. Another angle, but these are infinite in their nature. Infinite fields of consciousness. Now we have to add another word to this, and that is divine. Divine consciousness. Consciousness itself manifesting as fields. and manifested further as a classical world from these fields based on your assertion of free will that wants to crystallize in a certain way, and that results in 16 things. 5 objects of our perception. 5 objects, or 5 which are also objects, 5 organs that will take information in, 5 that will react to it, and then the interpretive faculty of really a substation which we call my mind. The 16 items. Then we see everything through that prism called the mind. But what is all that coming from? It's coming from another 6 items. One is to do with a sense of individuality, but the other 5 are subtle elements, fields, subtle fields of consciousness. Mere elements, tanmatras they're called. These tanmatras or bhutas, these crystallize as our world. In other words, it comes into our classical world according to our interpretation. We brought it in. We manufactured it. We can't say it's the other way around. There's a top-down causation, if you want to think of it like that. So the fundamental thing, really, is this consciousness. And we know it is existent. That explains also why it comes out as the slime mold that has the capacity to do all of this. It comes out as a migrating bird that knows its way, that goes from North America to South America every year and avoids going when there's a hurricane. Don't think that there are all those separate words. Your entire existence is contained in one single cell. That means that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Anything with parts, we're only looking at that small horizon. But the whole thing is only one. And that one is manifesting. It is both the efficient and material cause. Now you have reconciled what physicists have been scratching their heads over for over 100 years. How to reconcile, how to make a theory of everything, how to make a theory of quantum gravity, how to reconcile this subtle world, this most reliable world of physics, which is mysterious and strange and weird, only from our point of view, but it's a fundamental reality. And what we see as electrons and all those activities and so on is only really the representation of a field. And so we can see these fields represent increasing worlds, increasing, or we can put it the other way, decreasing complexity until we come to one consciousness, cosmic consciousness. Now we've seen how we can reconcile two ways of looking at the question of consciousness, the psychological aspect of it, the physical aspect of it, and the experiential aspect of it because somebody experienced it. Somebody who didn't think they could experience such a thing, who was trained in a classical way, and now they cannot accept that because of their profound experience. So we reconcile one other thing with it. Because from the science point of view, anybody who is interpreting it as something to do with spirituality or God or religion, no, we won't accept that. Automatically there's a response like that. From the 1700s, it's been like that, building up like that. And then the other way around, the people on the spiritual side will say, yeah, the physicists, they have no idea. Now you can reconcile both of these. So at the fundamental level, you reconcile them and say, yes, actually this pure consciousness, unsullied consciousness, is exactly what the Upanishads say it is. It is the foundation of everything. And if you want to call this God, you can do it. If you want to avoid the word, you can do it. But nevertheless, it is our fundamental nature. And the fundamental nature of consciousness is what makes this world. From it comes our way of thinking, from it comes inspiration and so on. Supposing you're sitting down, let us say in meditation, and all meditation is a kind of personal guided meditation, and you decide that you'll be something like an open book. You'll open yourself without any predetermined ideas, without any agenda, simply being open to this flow of divine consciousness. Then what will arrive? What will arrive would be thoughts. Thoughts put in such a way that they have the effect of elevating the spirit, have the effect of revealing more and more of the underlayers of what exists. And in revealing more and more and more, the sentiment comes out. It's not an intellectual exercise. When we talk about art, the aesthetics, painting, poetry, the real art comes as an expression. Excuse me. So the expression is something that you don't say, I think I'm going to feel sad on next Tuesday, 10 o'clock. I put it in my diary. I'll schedule my humor. I'll schedule jokes for Friday afternoon when I can relax after a week's work. So there's an area of spontaneity, creativity, which is consciousness being expressed, flowing back into consciousness, by the way, flowing towards the highest ideals that act as a trigger for opening. And so all of spirituality is an opening process. The closing process produces selfishness. A flower that decides, let me close up and not share my scent with anybody, what use is that? But we have the opportunity to open ourselves. And in doing so, affect others in a selfless way. It's the selfishness that gives us the difficulty. So we react to consciousness, which is always flowing. We experience it, we acknowledge it, we enjoy it, and with its help, with its assistance, we explore its depths, opening up new possibilities, because infinite possibilities are there. When you deny infinite possibilities, you're denying the quantum world. When you deny the quantum world, you're restricting yourselves. And the limitations, self-imposed limitations on yourself, act as a closing mechanism, not an opening mechanism. Science wants to be open, wants to discover. But what it's doing is it's closing the options. And that very often is what people call scientism. And it's very difficult to change that unless you turn it on its head and adopt a brand new understanding of it. And many scientists are doing this today. There's something called panpsychism, for example. There's a strong version of it, a tamer version of it, and so on. But this question of consciousness has arisen many revolutionary ways of thinking it, almost some of them independently. And all of them come back to this one thing. This is exactly what the Vedas had said. In fact, it's exactly what the Delphi oracle said. Know thyself, the Greeks. Now I mentioned then that there are three parts of this proposition that he puts out. And we'll see how it is aligned with all the ancient propositions. Firstly, it is dynamic. Things are dynamic. They are observed to be dynamic. Dynamic means unpredictable, a whole field of possibilities. So, this the ancient people called Jagat. The thing that is always changing This world is a thing that is always changing. The fact that we are able to observe it and control it tells us that we are the observer, but the experience of it tells us that we are also the thing observed. There is only one thing. So this holistic thing is there. And the holistic aspect of it brings us back to a fundamental principle also, that Vedanta is saying there's only one existence. We have a name for it, Brahman. Bra will indicate, that root will indicate something that is going on, projected as it were, infinitely. So, Brahman, there's only one existence. The second principle is the third postulant. That is, that we wish to discover ourselves. We have a desire to discover ourselves. We have a desire to improve ourselves. We have a desire to be perfect as your Father in heaven, to put Jesus' language on it. We have a desire to transform and discover and create, because this is evidence of a will. We have a will to do it. We want to do it. And when you examine it closely, you'll see it's self-evident. A self-evident thing. Nobody says, I want to stagnate. Nobody says, I want to be unhappy. Nobody says, I'm satisfied, fully satisfied. I have no wants. Everybody says, I want. And you see how many times the I comes. So these, I think, are self-evident truths. That the world is dynamic, that there is only one thing, holistic, because quantum physics tells us this. And entanglement is a graphic example of it, because everything is connected. The whole thing is connected. You cannot separate it. There's no such thing as individuality, individual parts, nothing like that. It's all one entity. And then the third one, as I say, is self-discovery. So Vedanta tells us there's only one existence. It gives us the holistic aspect. Secondly, it says that the thing that you are inquiring about fundamentally, because there's only one existence, when you find it, is one with that principle. Because we don't need to go and look at every quarter. If we understand this principle of holism, we don't have to look to particular parts. We can find the totality in us. So self-discovery ultimately is discovery of the whole. And then the last is mithya. This world is only apparitional. And when we wake up to it, it's gone. Totally. But on awakening it, we don't find a blank. We find the opening up of so many fields, different layers, if you will, of consciousness. And when we progressively do it, we can do it in one jump if we do intensive practice, or we can do it progressively. So the first principle, how to access it, acknowledge it. This is called the principles. We do it through the study of the Upanishads and other texts which tell us about it up front, even though our gut may not agree with it. Next thing is, we have to rally the emotions around and get the same experience. The difference is that this was a sudden revelation to Federica. But we can cultivate it. We can get to that point of understanding. And that requires practice. Like anything else, it requires practice. And the practice is modeled. The practice is laid out for us. The whole thing about scripture is do this, don't do that. It steers us in a certain direction. It tells us how to access this infinite potential that we have, infinite possibilities that we have. The glory of the divine is ours. And it is not that we can get it. It is already here. It just has to be revealed within us, which means all the obstacles have to go off. Now the first obstacle, therefore, will be the idea that This world is classical and is material and is the only thing we have, and all versions of that is what people understand. If we didn't understand that or misunderstand it, we would not get upset or go into depression or struggle. We would be completely confident of it. And so we start off with trying to correct this feeling of not knowing by developing in knowledge. Knowledge meaning understanding. Not only through logic, but through experience. And then the immediate result of that is our localized identity, which we put in as the be-all and end-all, and closes up like the flower withering instead of expanding and opening. And we do this through adoration, wonder, and thankfulness, in summary. And all the systems that we have, that we collectively call yoga, the practical implementation of the principles. And so in doing that, the question that was asked, how does this flow of words come and so on and so forth, is because we tune in to our own pure nature, which is a flow of divine grace. That is consciousness flowing in us, through us, as us, beyond us, that kind of thing. We leave it off there because apart from anything else, my computer is saying low battery, which means it'll probably die out soon. So, Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace be on all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swami. Very good. Have a nice night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Om